Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to another Monday Mini. That is going to be annoying. I don't know how else to say this. So before we get into the meat of this conversation, please note, this is not, because we're going to be referencing like a generation of the baby boomers or the boomers. And we're also going to talk about white women, because this is very personal to me. Not that I'm a boomer or a white woman, but that I have a lot of people who are in such. But in fact, I know that people, the people we are talking about, will probably never hear this. And the majority of our listeners are tired of talking about this. But again, this is something that I needed to vent and think through. Because if you're from Georgia, if you were raised in North Georgia, then you probably have had an influx of boomer women, white women, telling you why you were wrong. Because as we've noted, people who have voted for Donald Trump or who would consider themselves MAGA really feel like he's doing a great job. The amount of like people who refuse to say anything's different or wrong is unnerving. But just so that we know who we're talking about and why we're talking about it. Again, this is very much in line with the fact that I had a very disappointing conversation with a family member and I needed to dissect it. Again, we kind of referenced this before on my happy hour, previous happy hour, and like how to kind of maintain relationships in this time. So we're going to kind of get into the meat of why that was a big part of my conversations. So I want to tell you exactly the scenario. So at a recent visit, we were in the middle of discussing someone's dating life, in which my response was that they probably should not jump into anything too quickly and it would be good to be single for a while. So who I'm talking about is a man, because I feel like that needs to be obviously referenced, in which I was like, they probably need to be single, going through really a lot of failed relationships in the past 20 years. And just being like, hey, it's probably good to be single. And I say this as a person who was single most of my adult life until recently, and realized very further along in my adult journey that being single was not a curse. As in fact, I was okay with that. And I learned that, hey, it's not a bad thing. And as great as my relationship is now, because it is, and we do handle things, I think, pretty well for the most part, knowing that for some reason, and I'm not saying there is anything wrong, but if some reason that we were to break up or anything, I would be okay single. Also, the fact that I would not want to get back in the dating pool because that dating pool looks horrible. Yeah. Anyway. Going back to that, all of that. So I just made a sweeping comment, kind of that. And it seemed to really push the button. The family member's defense for that person was this. Do you know why the Lord created women? So that's how I was like, oh, all I said is he needed to be single. I don't know what's happening. And yes, this felt like a trap. So I hesitated, to which they responded with, no, really, do you know why? And I needed this is at a public restaurant with several people around us that were having a different conversation. So there was no need for this. Because like the way even the conversation came up was the fact that other people at the table were talking about this person's dating life and how he had fallen into another one that looked really sus. And everybody was like, what are you doing? Was the beginning of this conversation too. So, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know why. And they responded with to be helpers to men. To assist and be there for men. Men were lonely and needed a mate. Of course, my immediate response was, well, I don't think that's a thing. Being me, trying to figure out how to de-escalate this moment, as well as get out of this moment because we're about to have an argument. And again, the defensiveness came out and they responded with, no, yes, this is the reason, really. And of course, I was like, I can't do this. This is going to be bad. My response was to shut it down and reminded that this one person was jumping into relationships and have many failed relationships, which formed attachments that are no longer around, which did shut down the conversation. But this unwarranted response really had me spiraling. it's been a week or so, a couple of weeks, and I'm still thinking about this conversation because I'm like, why? And with this, I need to think about. I went down like, why would they bring this up? This is such a weird topic, and it was a woman, obviously, and it's like it came out of nowhere. We were all kind of like not laughing at them, but like laughing at the scenario that it has caused, and they were like, "Oh, Samantha, you need to know this. You need to hear this. You won't believe this type of case." So I was like, "Wait, why? How did we jump into that?" And then I started really thinking about how the information has come along and like social media and my fear of like older generations getting onto social media. It's already bad enough on hearing the news when we talk about Fox or News Nation and all those things. I'm like, oh, or Newsmax rather. And I was thinking, so what is this boomer generation hearing when it comes to the manosphere and red pill ideology? So of course I have to do the Sminty thing and start trying to find research, right? Anney, this is what we do now, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is how we think now. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be a lot out there. I did see a few things about them saying that the red pill thing is good. And as a reminder, red pill, like I'm going to sum it up, it's like comes back from the red pill, blue pill ideal with the matrix, and taking the red pill is going to unlock and show you the truth. But like raging radical misogynists took that over as being like, no, let me show you the conspiracy theories about how feminism is killing children and life in general. Like generalization right there, but essentially it's kind of that level. And the red pill led into like trad wives and led into like hegemonic femininity, which we're going to talk about at the end because I was like, that's a great phrase. All of that. But with all that, they were talking about it as if it's a good thing. So I was very hesitant to click on that. One of those happened to be, I think, an episode on a podcast, and the title of it is Boomer Red Pill. And in that, when they were listing off different subjects, so they kind of tackle, it says the Antichrist takeover of the Democratic, but they put demonic cratic. So they put that in to let you know who the Democrats are, party by the new left. So I think we know what that's about. And I was not about to waste my time nor give a click to that. Of course, there's a lot that we have talked about when it comes to women, red pill, and a manosphere, including different episodes about trad wives and just this recent episode with Bridget. And it's easy to see that those from that generation, from that boomer generation, are probably primed for this more conservative ideals of trad wives and red pills and manosphere. The generation that was taught that the nuclear family is the ultimate goal. And anything less than that, less than perfect, means failing. So having the perfect house, having the perfect baked pie, like all of that level, I mean, really, like the apron baked pie, you know what I'm talking about, is exactly what the red pill and manosphere look at as the good old days. So that is what they're talking about, that coming back to the golden age, essentially. So it isn't surprising to see that after years of progress and change, some of the boomers are really relieved to see this familiarity, this nuclear family coming back on board as the new, yes, this is the new trend we need to be on. And here are some thoughts from therapist.com about it. Quote, silent generation parents, which apparently are the generation before the boomers, and I didn't think about that. I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Raised baby boomers, often with strict rules, high expectations, and less warmth and affection. We now know this strict authoritarian parenting style is linked to children developing anxiety, low self-esteem, and social difficulties later in life. Many boomers grew up in a time of economic prosperity and social change with the rise of consumerism and the influence of television. They experienced significant cultural events like the Cold War, the civil rights movements, and the rise of rock and roll. These experiences shaped their values, attitudes, and perspectives on life, work, and family. As they entered adulthood, baby boomers often prioritized career success and material wealth. They were known for their strong work ethic and competitive drive. However, this focus on achievement also led to high levels of stress and burnout for some. So that level of like, it's such a interesting dichotomy that they grew up in such a progressive era, which we wouldn't even think is progressive because we're still fighting that same battle. But that so many people has such harsh pushbacks. And I'm saying that in the perspective, again, of the South, Old South, white Appalachian families, Old South, and I say Appalachia because that's close to us, but old Southern areas where segregation was prevalent until pretty much now, honestly. Sundown towns still exist. And to add to that, some statistics from the site, and I thought they were interesting because it does, I think it kind of points to, yeah, this makes sense. So they say they make up a large portion of the population. This is from 2024. Baby boomers were the largest generation in the U.S. until millennials surpassed them in number. Data from the 2020 census shows us that there are approximately 73 million baby boomers in the U.S. U.S. Census Bureau data from 2019 shows baby boomers make up approximately 22% of the population. They're less diverse than the overall population. According to the 2015 census, 75% of baby boomers are white, which was interesting to me. 75% of the baby boomers are white. They held more traditional gender identities. Baby boomers have seen the transformation from the silent generation traditional values to the more progressive attitudes of Generation X, Millennials, and Gen Z. A recent poll shows that the LGBTQIA plus identification goes up with each younger generation. Of the baby boomer generation, only 2.6 identified as LGBTQIA plus, compared to the 20.8 of Gen Z. Of course, there's a lot of conversations about coming out and who felt they could and who have died before they could. That is also added in too. But that is something to know because, yes, they also fear coming out still. Their views on sexuality are still evolving. A 2018 Pew Research Center survey found that only 27% of boomers believe same-sex marriage benefits society. On the other hand, 32% think it's detrimental, and 40% believe it has no impact. Only 12% personally know someone who uses gender-neutral pronouns, which I thought was a random statistic to put in, but, that makes sense too, right? Maybe just because they don't want to tell them. Who knows? Also, it says less than a quarter of them pursued higher education. Only 22% of boomer men and 20% of boomer women completed at least 4 years of college education. And then they talk about the wealth. That's that they had a lot of wealth. So it goes on. They played a significant role in shaping the modern American economy and suburban's expansion. Baby boomers have controlled more than 50% of households' wealth in the U.S. since 2008, and that's according to Federal Reserve data. Okay, so looking at some of those stats and in this conversation, of course, this is that same conversation that millennials and now Gen Zers are having about no, we could not afford a house like you could. Interest rates has gone up. Thanks to Reagan, we have lost control of being able to get money in any way or any kind of infrastructure. You have made sure to vote this way in order that the rest of us cannot have what you had. So the amount of wealth that went to anybody was to you, and then you took it away with this bullshit about trickle-down economy. But again, this is that level of okay, this makes sense as to some boomers, especially from the South, especially white people, have always been on the side of red pill, that modern idea that if we just do it this way, like the old days, you can be successful without acknowledging everything else that went terribly wrong. So with looking at these statistics, as well as their upbringing and idealization of the past, it's not too hard to understand that the boomer generation may be more than willing to push that narrative. They've done well. They've done well in this level of what they thought was good days. And white women specifically have always been the backbone of many of the movements. We've talked about this for all the movements, including white supremacist movements. Here's something from Red Pill Women, Heterosexual Fantasies in Misogynistic Spaces by Pauline Hobanks. And y'all, her paper, y'all should go read it. It's very long, but it hits on a lot of things. She writes, women's involvement in conservative and white supremacist movement is far from new. In fact, white women have historically played pivotal roles in these ideologies long before the advent of contemporary social media. The historical roots of women's involvement in white supremacist and conservative movements in America has been documented in movements such as anti-suffragism, the resistance to the Equal Rights Amendment, and the Ku Klux Klan, in which women played key roles in organizing, recruiting, and disseminating ideas. Some of these movements, such as the KKK, excluded women from men's groups. However, Buschetta and Power, two researchers, note these exclusions allow them to construct their own discourses and practices independently, challenging gendered power dynamics. Women's involvement in the Manosphere and online anti-feminist movements is therefore a contemporary extension of the long-standing historical pattern of white women's active participation in right-wing and white supremacist movements. Okay. So I'm not gonna break that down because I feel like that's self-explanatory, and we've talked about this many times. And again, I'm not saying all white women, but this does explain to me a lot more in this conversation about the white women in my life. Not you, Anney, of course, and many of those that I know that are not in the boomer generation, but those who have taught me in this level of like, why would you do this? This doesn't help you. This doesn't empower you. Are you truly happy? In so much context. And then Bridget does a wonderful job talking about the influence of white women in the conversations like these, as well as in our recent episode about the EV magazine. So you should definitely listen to that, because we are talking about how powerful these types of conversations are. And then when it comes to white women specifically who play leaderships in these roles, even though they're not supposed to play leadership in these roles. And so to kind of backtrack on that story, after that conversation, it was obvious that we were all uncomfortable. And I walked away going, yeah, so I'm not coming home anytime soon. But then obviously it weighed on them as well. So they sent me a text with a video link about trying to explain this to me. And now the video in itself, I have had this conversation as a Christian when I was way back when about how if someone representing you, and this kind of is that ideal, if someone representing you actually does represent your ideals, that you don't have to be the forefront leader in that. So that's wonderful. In that idea that men, if they're truly godly men, as they would say, they would actually do for the benefit of everyone. And you being a helper and being behind him and, pushing him on, and great. All good and well. So that kind of narrative was like, okay, I kind of see what you're saying. I think, and they said, I don't think I explained this right, and I used the wrong words in their response. But then as I looked to the page that they sent me to, it had very right-winged, misogynistic content below. Also, they were tokenizing, I believe, a Muslim woman as to agreeing with some of these. And I don't think it's her. I think they just AI'd her or copy pasted from a different page to make it look like she was agreeing with all the content on there. That I was like, are you trying to show you're diverse? Are you trying to pretend like you're showing your diversity in this when you also have right-wing people who are talking about, women don't have orgasms. They only, have sex to have children and please men. And you're like, wait, what is this? So again, this is where I was like, yes, so I was correct. She is getting some information from very right-winged conservative ideals that would be considered a part of the manosphere or red pill. And I want to go on to another bit from Hobanks, how she talks about hegemonic femininity, as I mentioned earlier. So unlike Connell, so she has obviously a lot of research in this paper. So I'm going to name some of the things, and you can go back to look at her paper, as I mentioned earlier. But unlike Connell's 1987 emphasized femininity, which is largely about compliance, Hamilton argued that hegemonic femininity involves active participation in upholding not just gender inequality, but also other axes of domination, such as race and class, which is what we're talking about, intersectionality, I guess, discrimination level.
Yeah. Intersectional discrimination.
Yeah, I guess so. So they continue on. Hamilton defined hegemonic femininities as the most celebrated cultural ideals of womanhood in a given time and place that serve to uphold and legitimate all axes of oppression in the matrix of domination simultaneously. And again, goes on. Women who embody hegemonic femininity benefit from the femininity premium, individual advantages over other women, as well as collective benefits derived from their privileged positions within other systems of dominations, such as whiteness and class privilege. In Western societies, femininity premiums might include access to privileged partners and the ability to enforce standards of sexual respectability over subordinate femininities. And lastly, the pursuit of hegemonic femininity, despite its detrimental effects on women as a group, can be understood as a strategic bargain that offers specific women personal advantages, which, compounded with the collective class and race benefits from which they may already benefit, contribute to intersectional domination. Hamilton argued that these women are not cultural dopes, but instead actors strategically navigating for an advantage. Okay, so this would be the prime of what we were trying to talk about with Evie Magazine, which is owned by a woman who says women should not be leaders or CEOs, but is CEO of her own company.
Yeah, and I think that's like hit the nail on the head of a lot of what we've been talking about, especially with Bridget, because even Candace Owens, it narrowed in on, here's this business I can make money from. So I do think like sometimes it is completely internalized. Sometimes it's a completely understood strategic choice. Sometimes it's both. But I do think like people know, oh, I will really benefit from this privilege, this privilege, this privilege.
I mean, I hate the word, but this would be, in today's terms, the ultimate pick-me. In that every way, knowing that they've got these advantages. And if they can at least submit to the most powerful, they'll be second most powerful. And that's good enough. But again, there's so much to be said about this article or this paper written by Hobanks, which thank you, because it's an amazing paper. Obviously, I just got into the meat of it. Again, we do need to come back and do a whole episode about this idea of hegemonic femininity and what it represents and why it's so dangerous. Again, as I was saying earlier, women are really the backbone of all of these movements. I don't think they could be as powerful as it was if it weren't for other women. Like Moms for Liberty really did a number in what we see today. And turns out she's gone through the founder is going through a whole thing and no one cares because it's kind of taking a life of its own. But with these two combining factors, from what I'm seeing with the baby boomer generation and the idea of hegemonic femininity, it isn't too hard to see how easily these narratives is adopted by that generation. Again, they were primed for it. When we talked about true love ways and celibate culture, all of these, it is based on these old school ideas way back when. When we talk about the beginning of anti-abortion movements, it wasn't until the 50s, 60s, 70s that really came out. It's like, wait, what? Why do you care now? What's happening? So there's a lot of levels to this thing. And even though I could not find it, because again, it may just be oxymoron to say that it's a Manosphere influence, but I've seen the difference, and I've talked about this with you, Anney, and I've talked about this with my partner and other people, the difference of where some of my family members were 10 years ago versus today. And the hope I had of things changing and at least them being compassionate and empathetic to this. Again, that I'm like, oh yeah, we're not going to talk for a while. I'm going to need a break because this is dangerous points where we're going to end up ruining the relationship. But it never, I will always be there for my family, of course, no matter what. But there are going to be things that I'm no longer trust you. And I've stopped trusting you for a while on some of these things. And these are because you will not hear me when I say I am petrified for my well-being because of these things that you have voted for. And then the fact that you really don't see it as a big deal because at least you're getting yours is what your thoughts are. And at least it's not you, without hearing me. But all of that to say, and then putting that cap on with, but no, this is the better. This is why it's better. And then bring in these theories that have been regurgitated now and now welcomed. It's a thing. But yeah, so I like I said, I was having trouble in finding a lot of information, especially if generationally, if it's different and how well, we've talked about the older generations being really susceptible to misinformation and disinformation, but we are not talking about it as much as we've talked about like the younger generation. Because that's all, like, it's very obvious when we talked about like the young kids, young Gen Z men being really disappointing in that they're listening to people like Joe Rogan and the such, and Charlie Kirk, who was on that page that she sent me. But like stuff like that. That is the reaction. Yes, Anney,
it's a visceral reaction.
And that should be that is the correct reaction. But a lot of these things, like it's concerning, and I hate that that's how I see them. A lot of the older generations, which I'm like, you love so hard, but of course it seems like you hate just as hard. You just don't call it hate. You now call it like Bible or religion, and that's really disappointing. But yeah, if y'all have something, if you know of things, let me know. If you have experiences, I know, like I said, our listeners are like, that's not me. I know, we know it's not you.
You wouldn't be here.
I've gotten so much encouragement.
Unless you were hate listening.
Which is like, okay, you do you. But like most of the people who have ever commented or talked to us, of like the amount of like hope I get from those are amazing. So please send us that. So obviously we're not talking about that, but in general, like as I'm looking at the world around us and how this has become such an okay standard, and trying to figure out at one point, how did we go backwards? Because we were moving nicely forward, and then all of a sudden we backtracked, and it's like, what just happened?
Yes. And we know so many of you listeners unfortunately can relate, but fortunately we can provide solace for each other or hope for each other or whatever it is. If you would like to email us, you can. Our email is hello@stuffInevertoldYou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Momstuff Podcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic bookstore, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.